part of the problem here is the question of who owns public institutions, and particularly who owns the public schools. When you hear people talk about public schools, they always talk about we. It's always the we. This doesn't reflect our values, or we don't like that sort of thing, or whatever. And of course, it's a presumption that whoever is using that is speaking for everyone. One of the ways to solve that is to try and be neutral, and that works fine in some situations and not so well in others. You can't teach anything and be neutral. Public schools can't teach everything. They have to make decisions about what to teach and what not to teach. And so what do they teach? They teach to the non-controversial norm. That's, my wife is a public school teacher too, and that's my experience, is they look for the norm, and that's what they teach to. So in a way, you sort of get majoritarianism coming and going. There are ways in which, to answer the prom question, I really think the public schools are complicit in the private proms. They facilitate them. They accept them. If they were the will, and the Mississippi prom, I lived 4 years in Macon, Georgia, and it's the same, I think, throughout the South, and frankly, I would guess in many places in the North as well, is that the kids aren't the problem, it's the parents. And it's always resolved by a private prom because supposedly private conduct can't be reached. But the school is always facilitating it. They're putting up posters, they're allowing announcements, they're doing all sorts of things. If there were the will to do away with that, they could do away with it. I think that there is a lack of political will. And that goes back to where I started, which is we made a conscious choice in the United States that public education would be controlled by the majority. You tell people in Europe that we have publicly elected school boards and they look at you like you're nuts. This is a profession in Europe, and only professional people who understand what they're doing are supposed to be able to affect public education. Whereas here, our decision is that public education should reflect the will of the majority, and that's why school boards are elected, and that's why teachers and administrators sweat every time the parents call because they're political positions.
Having taught for, I won't need it. Except a week without teaching, the voice can't go. But having taught for 37 years here in Ohio, I would say that you're right, most people teach to the norm, but those of us that don't, you get your benefits out of it, because I'm looked at as the radical liberal here in Utah, and I would say
there's two of us.
Well, I'll guarantee you the one sitting next to you is too. But it'd be a moderate in some other parts of the country. If I can go back to the club issue, okay. My first question is, the club was okayed by the school and the district, correct?
Under the gun.
But it was okay.
Yes.
Okay.
They tried to do away with the club, but the ACLU leapt to their defense, and so then they tried to scrap all non-curricular clubs, and they recognized that was cutting off some vital parts of their body despite the rest of it, and so they relented eventually and allowed clubs. There are gay straight alliances now in the Salt Lake District. Okay, way to go, ACLU.
Yeah.
So yes, they did sanction it.
Okay, so if it was sanctioned, and in some districts that means all clubs are treated alike, then they got to put to them. That club, as long as they're doing what every other club is doing, is going to be okay. I don't think will and grace would have been the big issue, but just them having a fundraiser would have been more of an issue. And if...
In defense of my hypothetical, though, can I just say one thing?
I know, I changed your hypothetical to will and grace.
Is there anybody in this room who doubts that a lot of the liberalized attitude towards GLBT came in part from that stereo-laden, silly TV show? Am I the only one who thinks that? And so, what is at core, it seems to me, is a real concern that you see reflected in especially the Christian right when they object to gay marriage. Because what they're saying is, it does affect us. It affects everything if we allow gay marriage. And it appears to sanction what we consider to be sinful. It erodes our kids' values. We don't let our kids watch Will and Grace at home, and now at school they're getting all this publicity for this fundraiser, making it sound so fun, seemingly giving sanction to what Will and Grace represents as an undercurrent.
But I think you have a club versus class curriculum. Club they don't have to go to. They don't have to go to the fundraiser. They don't have to do that at all. They can badmouth it outside of school all they want, in school. They don't have to go to it. That's their choice. But when they're in my class, they don't have much of a choice.
I understand that captive audience notion, but I'm just trying to raise the issue about parents who are concerned about their kids being exposed to something that they find religiously offensive, and whether or not they should be allowed to veto.
But didn't we try that with alcohol?
All right, let's just go down the road.
Or eating shrimp, can you say that?
This is happening already. So in Massachusetts, gay couples can get married. And so what do you teach children in the schools? There is this desire, hope on the part of the gay and transgender rights movement to say, we don't teach anything to children in schools about marriage. That's just not true. So the question is, after there's gay marriage in Massachusetts, do you only present books in which there are different sex couples? Because there are couples in books, king and queen, princess and prince, right? And so in Massachusetts, they teach a book called Prince and Prince. So I think it's fifth graders, I can't remember. And a very religious family objected to the subject matter, they said, we want notice from the school when this is going to be taught, and we want to opt our children out of the lesson. And the Massachusetts school system basically told them to pound sand. They said, no, we're not going to tell you, and you can't take your kids out. Again, that's not the way I would run that particular class. Why? Why is this important now? Why not wait 30, 50 years to revisit the issue of whether that child can be opted out of that classroom? Because, frankly, I have faith in the slippery slope. I do think that it's equality. It's hard to give someone a little bit of equality, right? Why? Why draw the line here? But there's a difficulty. So there's a slippery slope argument that is, if we grant gay people any protections under the law, courts will then say we have to go all the way. That's a problem in a democracy, because we believe in general that the majority rules. Of course, courts protect minorities, but that principle, frankly, has only gone so far historically. And for a small number of people in black robes to decide a major social controversy creates issues. But this fear that exposing people to identities and information will change their minds, that's an undemocratic fear. That is, we should protect people from information and dialogue, because otherwise we're all going to change our minds. We only have the right to talk to each other and be listened to, and then we each are going to be able to make up our minds. And it may be true that the more we talk about homosexuality, the less of a big deal it becomes, but I don't know how we solve that problem unless we throw out democracy, which I don't think anybody's really willing to do.
And by the way, just to clarify, when Professor Rosky was disparaging people in black robes, he didn't.
Oh, I was talking about judges, yes.
I always figure I know what I'm wearing.
I just want to address the Massachusetts schools and talking about all kinds of families, because you're really not talking about the parents, you're talking about the kids. Because there are kids of gay families
Absolutely.
in that classroom, and